So if this is your first time, one of the ways that we structure our gatherings is from, fairly often we have series. And so we'll talk about a particular theme and topic, and we'll kind of work through that for a month at a time or even more. And so this series of conversations that we're in, and this is week 3 today, this series is called Perennial. And that word comes from a phrase, the perennial philosophy. Essentially what we're talking about is this sense that despite we live in a world with all kinds of different religious expressions and spiritual traditions, and while there's so much diversity and uniqueness among them, you may have also had this sense that there is some sort of unified truth beneath them, that maybe they're all pointing to some larger, more mysterious reality that one singular tradition or expression couldn't explain or couldn't contain. So this has been known as the perennial philosophy, what lies beneath, what transcends and yet includes these various traditions and paths. And what we're really exploring is, what does it look like to live a life that can integrate the diversity of spirituality and religion in the world, that we can move through and we can find the things that really are nourishing to us, and we can leave behind the things that are not. And so last week, we talked about this journey that we go on as human beings. Maybe for you, it looks like a journey from high control, high fear religious environments, what we called dogma, where you are basically told this is what you're allowed to believe and what you're not allowed to believe. And then this journey sort of progresses to the point where perhaps you find yourself in a place of more freedom and individuality, and trusting that the nudging of your soul and what you find spiritually nourishing is something that you can follow. And so it's an individual path. It can sometimes be scary because we're leaving the known and the safety of community, and we're finding our way into our own individual journey, but it's so worthwhile. And so that's kind of where we're at currently. And I know I was reflecting about that last week. I was reflecting on what that journey has been like for me, and I hope that you, whether you were there last week or not, that you can think about what that journey has been like and all those courageous steps you took along the way. But for me, I was thinking about these kind of a succession of books that I read, that I was handed, and kind of how I went from book to book to book, kind of on this rabbit trail of exploring what felt authentic to me spiritually. And there would be times, and I can look back now because I have a bookshelf that kind of tells the story of where I've been. And I realized that I haven't even read a lot of the books on my bookshelf. I don't know if does that count? Sometimes people will be like, have you read so-and-so, this book? And I'll be like, well, I have it on my bookshelf. Is there some level of energetic, I don't know. So maybe, I don't know if that counts or not. Something I've also been thinking about that I'm not sure if it counts. I was having a debate with a friend the other day, and we were talking about how I love audiobooks. I think audiobooks are great, but I don't think that if you listen to an audiobook, it counts as having read the book. Anyone with me on this? Okay. Thank you. There's passion in this room. Look, we love you all, and look, there's no right or wrong answer, but I think that it would be important if if someone says, have you read this book? And you listen to the audiobook, just say, I listened to the audiobook, right? That's not too hard. If any of you leave at this point, I understand. I'm sorry. But I went on this journey with books, and if that makes me a nerd, I'm a nerd and proud, right? A journey of books. Anyway, just being honest. But in my tradition, what I grew up in, there was a warning for you to be careful what you read, even, because it could lead you down what they called, I don't know if you heard this phrase before, but they called it the slippery slope. Have you heard of the slippery slope, right? You read this book and it's going to lead you to that book, and you're going to listen to that podcast, and then all of a sudden you're going to be all the way in another territory that you never expected, right? And so I read these books and I started skiing down the slippery slope. I'm just like, whatever, this is all good. But something that I encountered fairly quickly that was a real surprise to me, and it was incredibly nourishing, was the writings and the poetry of the mystics, the ones we call the mystics. And I, at the time, first encountering the mystics, had never heard of them. And it's so surprising for me looking back now to realize that the mystics, who are, again, these speakers, authors, poets who really are embedded in all of the major religions, have their mystics, and yet often within the confines of a more mainstream organized religious expression, they don't really talk about the mystics. And so I was wondering, why hadn't I been told about the mystics? Why hadn't I heard of them? Is there something dangerous about the mystics, right? And it was interesting because I looked around and I saw, okay, there are definitely mystics from my tradition. There are tons of Christian mystics, but there are also the Sufi mystics, which is the mystic stream of Islam. There are Hindu mystics, Buddhist mystics, Jewish mystics. There are even scientists who I feel look at life from a mystical lens. So I call them the scientific mystics. And I also found that there were many people who were taking a look at some of the greatest teachers like Jesus and Buddha, and they were even recontextualizing them as mystics. That, man, a lot of what Jesus and Buddha were saying it's very mystical language. So if you're out there and you're like, what are we talking about? What is a mystic? I want to define this for us. And I want to define it for you here and now, because if you were to go to Google, as I did this week, to ask what is a mystic, there's a lot of conflicting information. Specifically, Google, if you Googled what is a mystic today, Google would say, well, it could be a women's Washington, D.C. basketball team. You might be referring to a coastal Connecticut town. You might be referring to a water sports company. And then it said, fourth, you might be referring to a spiritual person, right? So those are the four things that Google said the mystics are. So I thought, look, I want to be really clear today. What are we talking about when we're talking about the mystics? And if we're going for clarity, let's just go to our old friend Merriam-Webster, right? The classic of the dictionaries. And if you go to Merriam-Webster, it'll refer you to mysticism. It'll say a mystic is someone who practices mysticism. So what is mysticism? Well, as Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines it, the experience of mystical union or direct communion with ultimate reality reported by mystics. Number two, the belief that direct knowledge of God, or trade whatever word works for you, the universe, source, creator, life, the direct knowledge of that spiritual truth or ultimate reality can be attained through subjective experience, such as intuition or insight. Why I think this is important for us in this conversation about perennial truths and universal wisdom is that in many ways, all religion actually begins with a mystical experience. I don't care what level of dogma and doctrine follows in the centuries to come, what level of legalism, fear, rules that come in, that at the core of all of the religions that we're familiar with, there is a mystical experience. There is a connection to a divine reality that is subjective and it is mysterious. And so it seems that what so much of religion, particularly what many of us are reacting to, moving away from, deconstructing, so much of religion has lost this sense that there is an experience available, an experience of reality that is subjective. It finds itself within the experience of our hearts, of our minds, intuition and insight. And so what the mystics do, what those who write and who create wonderful poetry and beautiful images that are mystical in nature, what they do is they preserve that reality, that we don't need some kind of middleman to experience the divine, but that maybe it's right in front of us. Maybe it's about us being, as Joseph said, truly in the moment. And I think for those of us who did come from religious environments that were highly controlling of us, that gave us a lot of fear, I think there is a sense of solidarity and comfort knowing that there is actually an ancient stream within various religious and spiritual traditions that are not fear-based, but that is based in love and connection. See, what I find fascinating about the mystics is that regardless of what tradition they come from and represent, they tend to sound a lot more like each other than they do to their own home-based tradition. So what I mean is that I've found, maybe you found this too, the Christian mystics sound more like Sufi mystics than they sound like Orthodox Christians, which is just a fascinating thing to notice, because many have said that the various mystics are speaking the same language in different accents. And what I found when I began to kind of go through the different sayings and the different words of the mystics in my own journey is I found that what they were saying was so incredibly uplifting, so incredibly encouraging, leading me to a sense of not feeling separate from or judged by ultimate reality, but included in, comforted by, seen by, and really one with. Right? And so maybe you're out there and what you need today is just some sense of being uplifted. And I hope that the words of the mystics are uplifting to you. And we'll get to them. Trust me, we're going to get to the words of the mystics. I'm building it up. I'm like, they're coming. Don't worry. We're going to read their words. But I do want to say this, because they're talking about this uplifting news, this good news. And the religion that I came from, we had this word gospel. And that was the word that we used to share about the good news. That's literally what that word means if you look at the etymology. It just means good news. And in my tradition, it meant if we were going to share the gospel, it meant we were going to tell other people about this good news of this tradition, right? So, you may have heard of in the New Testament, the accounts of Jesus' life were called the gospels, right? But so that's what that word means. But it's interesting because when I think about growing up and I think about the good news that I grew up with, it wasn't actually that great of news when I really think about it. It was like, here's the good news that I was told. You are sinful, you were born bad and evil, and basically if nothing else happens, then you will be subject to eternal punishment. That does not sound like good news. I don't know. My barometer for good news might be off. I could be totally off here, but that does not sound like good news. And then they gave a little bit of good news. They're like, hey, all that we just said, we have a way out for you. We have a remedy for you. If you just follow everything in our religion, you believe all the right things, then you can escape that. And I was like, that's kind of interesting. It's like horrible news and then better news? I don't know. Is that good news? I don't know. So I was thinking about what that feels like, right? And so kind of what that does to you. And of course, there's an image that came to me, and I don't know if you might have had the same image growing up, but I think for me it was, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Anyone else, this is the image that comes to them when they think, no? Okay, all right, just me. Well, I'll explain. In the beginning of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Indiana Jones is sitting down at a meeting with these bad guys, and they reveal that they've actually poisoned his drink. And then they're like, but hey, we have the antidote. And then the antidote gets thrown somewhere, and 20 minutes of the movie is spent him just trying to find the antidote. And it's like, I got to get the antidote. And I realized that's a lot of what religion felt like for me growing up. I was told, you've been poisoned, right? You are not well, and you are, going to a bad place. But we have the antidote, and now you got to do all these things to get the antidote. Now, next time you watch the Temple of Doom, it takes on a deeper spiritual meaning, right? But the reason I share about the good news is because I've found that when I encountered the mystics, it actually, for the first time, was really, really good news. And so what I wanted to call today's message is the mystic gospel. Because we've been in this series about unity, about finding unity and connection between these various spiritual paths and traditions. And it's something that we could talk about endlessly. But what I think the mystics give us a window into is that it can also be lived and experienced and felt. And so what I want to do is I want to rapid fire share some of my favorite mystic sayings, some of the words of the greats. There are so many out there that obviously I'm not going to be able to cover today. So if you're like, Jake, you missed my favorite mystic, you email me or but I'm doing my best. But tried to share some of the greats. And what I hope you do in this moment is take a minute and just kind of meditate on these words, because it's one thing for the words themselves to have an impact, but I think that the words carry something with them behind the language. There is a sense of safety and love and connection that I think often isn't in the words themselves, but it's in sort of the energy the words carry. And so I invite you in this next moment, even if you want to close your eyes, or if you just want to feel the tone, right? The sensation of what these words bring. So I'm going to share some now, and we'll start with who I think of as the GOAT, the greatest of all time, Rumi, who lived in from 1207 to 1273, a Sufi mystic. He says, "You are not a drop in the ocean; you are the entire ocean in a drop." Meister Eckhart, Christian mystic who died in 1328. The eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me. Kabir, a Hindu mystic, 1398 to 1518. Between you and the beloved, there is no barrier but your own mind. I noticed looking up his lifetime, Kabir was 120 years old, so I think being a mystic might also be really good for your health. Joseph knows a little bit about that. So, Albert Einstein, who I think of as a scientific mystic, 1879 to 1955, a human being is part of a whole called by us the universe. Julian of Norwich, a Christian mystic, and maybe one of the most famous mystical sayings of all time, all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of thing shall be well, born in 1342. And a more recent mystic who I think is kind of reinterpreting Julian of Norwich's great words, but more recently we have the mystic Bob Marley, who said, every little thing is going to be all right. I want to pause here for a moment. As we kind of cycle through these words, what is showing up for you as being the good news of the mystics? Maybe it's something like recognizing that we have always belonged. We have always been deeply connected to the divine. That union and oneness and love, they are our birthright. And that we can have a direct experience of that. Not mediated by someone else, by a guru or someone in power or an institution or an authority, but direct in the here and now. Now, you might be out there and you might not fully connect to this right away. You might have a little hard time going, how does this actually translate to my life? How is this good news for me in the here and now? Or maybe you're out there and you're like, why am I supposed to believe what a bunch of medieval hippies had to say about reality? But I find that it's interesting because in the modern day, even scientists, specifically physicists, are finding more and more connection to what the mystics said as evidenced in how physics actually work, particularly in quantum physics, which is the most mysterious of the sciences, I think, where they're looking at smaller and smaller particles splitting the atom, going down to the thing behind the thing, behind the thing, behind the thing. And what they're finding is that when you go to this quantum level, so incredibly small that it's hard to fathom, when you go to this level, things operate on such a deeply mysterious and interconnected way that what seems to be the fabric of reality is actually pointing us to a deep sense of interconnection. And we could talk for ages on why that is. But in short, I think it's important to know that some of the most well-known and foundational quantum physicists all ended up with a more spiritual perspective. Whether it's physicists like David Bohm, Max Planck, Werner Heisenberg, they all looked deep into reality, into the fabric of how the natural world works. And what they all tended to say, and what they're all similar for saying, is that there is some kind of unitive connective tissue in reality. And a lot of them called it consciousness, right? They said that it seems like consciousness is the foundational aspect of reality, spirit, right? That even behind matter, there is some sort of spiritual reality. And so as this field develops, more and more, the parallels are being recognized. A physicist named Fritjof Capra wrote a book called The Tao of Physics. He says the parallels between modern physics and Eastern mysticism are not merely interesting, they suggest that these two traditions are leading to the same vision of reality. Now, those in the ancient world did not have access to this kind of science or these kind of physics. So instead of speaking about it more directly, they use things like parables and poetry. That there is something perennial about not speaking about these deep truths directly, but using story and language and imagery. They've calculated that 40 to 50% of the words that Jesus said were parables, were in story form. I mean, like in the Bible, not like literally everything he said. Imagine they're like, Jesus, are you going to the bathroom? He's like, well, 2 farmers and a donkey. No, it's like, this is why in the Zen tradition, koans, these almost these riddle-like stories that test your own understanding of reality, right? These ways to apprehend the mysteries of the universe without going directly into them, but expanding our mind. The words of the Sufi poets, if you've explored, are so evocative in their imagery, right? But there's this way of avoiding explaining things directly that's so great about the mystics, right? They leaned into their very namesake, the mystery of it. There's a Greek root for the word mystery, maien, and it means to close one's mouth. Have you ever had an experience of life that was so transcendent and beautiful and mysterious? Or maybe it was filled with grief and heaviness, but there was a sacredness to the moment, and you knew that words were not going to add anything. They were only going to take away. That sometimes the most sacred and reverent thing we can do in a moment is to simply close our mouths and be in the presence of mystery. There are things, friends, that are beyond language, beyond our understanding, that are simply leads us to the place of awe, where closing our mouths is the best and most honoring course of action. I think this is why contemplation and stillness and reflection and wonder and awe, these are the methods, these are the tools, these are often the ways in to help us contact something so mysterious and divine. Now, it's interesting because I think we can lean into the mystery so far that if you're like me, you might get this anxiety that comes up and says, well, if it's just pure mystery, then how can we ever know? And are we never going to know? Are we going to be in a place where we're just always wondering what's going on, right? Like there are TV shows that intentionally leave you in a place where you're always wondering. Like if you ever watch the show Severance, like I don't think you're ever going to get answers on what's going on. There was a TV show Lost, kind of a similar thing. I think at the very end, they finally, I never watched it, but they it was on my bookshelf. But I think at the very end, they give you some answers, but they spend 5 seasons and you're never really quite sure what's going on. And so you might approach reality in the same way. Like, are we just being strung along? But I think mystery in this context is a little different than that. And Richard Rohr, the Franciscan priest, he makes a beautiful distinction about mystery, not as something that we can never know, but maybe something that we can always be in the process of discovering. He says, mystery is not something that you cannot understand, but it is something that is endlessly understandable. It is multi-layered and pregnant with meaning and never totally admits to closure or resolution. Friends, maybe we would stop seeing mystery as something that is out of our grasp and more as something that is both within our grasp and beyond our grasp, right? That it is bottomless, so there will always be new layers to explore. It's like bottomless breadsticks at Olive Garden. We are only limited by our will and imagination, right? See, being a mystic, this is why being a mystic is not about explanation, it's about experience, which is why wonder and awe are so important. I think wonder and awe are some of the things that we've most lost in the modern day. You with me on that, right? With the technology and our apparent illusion of being masters over our environment, we no longer look around at the world with wonder. We have a wonder deficiency, right? We're low on vitamin awe. I've copyrighted that, so if you say that, it's going to be 10 cents. Thank you. We take these things for granted because our brains are pattern recognition machines. It's how we survived in the ancient world. So we see things and we see familiarity, we see patterns. But it also means that we look out at the world and we see past the mystery. We see past the miracle of life, and we just see into that which is familiar. So I think it can be helpful. It can be a good practice to get back into that experience of wonder and awe, to work that muscle out a little bit. So in order to do that, I thought I'd just bring along some of my favorite awe-inspiring facts. Like, I'll start with this. Narwhals. Narwhals are a thing. You're telling me narwhals are here on this planet and are not an invention from Harry Potter? Narwhals are real? Is it just me? No one else? No one else looks at narwhals and thinks this is a real thing. All right, I thought you were going to be like me and be like, whoa, narwhals are crazy. Okay, all right. Well, when I look at narwhals, I go like, we live in a magical, amazing world. I guess just me. You're at the grocery store. You're going to Whole Foods. You're like, maybe I could get broccoli, or maybe I could get something a little different. Romanesco broccoli is a thing. You're telling me that you don't go to the grocery store and see this, and you're like, what a mysterious world. Did I take drugs before I went in here? No. That's just a thing. That's a thing here on the earth. I don't know. This one always gets me. You're telling me you have a spinning disc, and then you put needles down onto a groove, and then Led Zeppelin comes out? Like, I don't understand. It's just so mysterious and beautiful. Or here's this last one. I have to explain this one a little bit. But we as human beings, I don't know if you know this, and I hate to break it to you if you don't know this, but we as human beings are mostly empty space. In fact, all of matter is mostly empty space, because the molecules that we are composed of are composed of atoms that are moving really, really fast. There's not much of them, but they're creating the illusion of solidity because of the way they move, right? We're kind of familiar with this, right? Well, I'll let you know on the degree of which reality is mostly empty space. If you were to take the space between our atoms and compress them down, right? So there's all that empty space went away. All of the human beings on the planet would fit into one sugar cube. That is how much empty space there is in our world. So if that is not a fact that brings out a sense of awe and mystery to this world around us for you, then I did my best, right? Okay, so. But honestly, friends, this is why I look at those of you who go out into nature and you study the birds, or those of you who garden and you spend time paying really deep attention to the flowers. I look at you as mystics, because so often being a mystic is really just the art of paying attention to what is, to all the wonder and awe available to us right now in this world, in this moment. So while I appreciate the words of those who we call the mystics, I appreciate their poetry and their writings, but I actually don't think the point is to look at them and go, oh, look how great they were. Look at what amazing authors and writers they were. I think the point was actually to listen to them when they told us that this reality is available to all of us. It is an incredibly inclusive reality, that the only distance between us and the divine is of our own making and of our own choosing. It's right here for us. So when we look at reality, and instead of seeing ourselves as separate or disconnected, but instead we see that we belong to it, that instead of it's us and the universe, it's actually just one big us. When we see a world of union, we see a reality of love, we all are mystics in those moments. Love is perhaps the foundation of being a mystic. And I want to just close with a couple more of these great mystical words, a little more rapid fire. First, this comes from this great mystic text called The Cloud of Unknowing, author unknown, but we know it comes to us in the 14th century. God can be embraced by love, but never by thinking. Rumi again, gotta hit Rumi twice on this one. He said, love is the bridge between you and everything. A favorite for a lot of you, Thomas Merton, 1915 through 1968, the monk, Trappist monk, he said, love is our true destiny. We do not find the meaning of life by ourselves alone. We find it with another. Friends, the mystic gospel is this reminder that reality is relational. Reality is grounded in love. While it might be mysterious, that doesn't mean that it cannot be known, but that it is an endless journey of discovery. And that this reality, this truth, this sense of love and connectedness, it is available to all of us. So I want to take a moment, if you would, and again, because we can only think about this so much, it's actually more about feeling and leaning into the love. So if you would just take a moment, if you're comfortable, rest your gaze, close your eyes, find yourself in a comfortable position. And we just rest into the mystery for a moment. We let go, even just for these next couple of minutes, we let go of our need to make sense. We let go of our need to understand it all. And we trust our own experience, our own insight, our own intuition. And we trust that whatever came up for us today, whatever our intuition brought to us, is exactly what we needed for our journey. Even if that was a sense of discomfort. Maybe there were some questions raised without answers. Maybe there was some curiosity without resolution. But we trust that we're right on time, that the universe in its complexity is not something that we're separate from, but that we are a part of, that we belong to. And that belonging is love. We might not always feel it. The world might at times seem dark. But we turn, even just for a moment, to these words, 700 years old, right? A 700 years that certainly has had a lot of darkness, and yet these words have remained. All shall be well. All shall be well. And all manner of thing shall be well. And with just a couple more breaths, as you feel comfortable, you can open your eyes.